Welcome to the Crime Report. My name is Ron Chhinzer, and I'll be hosting this every Friday as a news segment on Juno News, where we talk about crime from the west coast of Canada all the way to the east coast, from the south border connecting to the U.S. all the way up north, the icy north, where we just talk about all of the things happening in Canada that are causing all of you at home and all of us wherever we are to be worried about our next steps and what's going to happen in our homes, our communities, and our streets. And a lot of these things are stuff where we all look at it and we say, how is this happening? Knowing the history, the background, and the facts in all of these situations, normal Canadians are now stepping up and putting this as a top priority in the country. Now, my background is 20 years in law enforcement. I've worked as a civilian working in intelligence with the Peel Regional Police Service, listening to major wiretaps on international investigations, joint force operations with United States law enforcement agencies. And then I was a police officer in the Toronto Police Service, where I started off working in some of the hardest hit communities, focused on at-risk youth programs, transitioning to headquarters to work on administrative programs throughout the city to really help our communities get better, and then transitioning to the hard stuff because the world began to change as soon as the laws changed and the government changed in 2015. I transitioned into deep investigative work with the Organized Crime Enforcement Unit in the Toronto Police Service, where I worked in the Integrated Gun and Gang Task Force and founded and headed up the Gang Prevention Task Force. And now I get to be able to provide all of you all of that information condensed in something normal, something easy to digest, but also something where you as the listener is going to watch this and say, what do we need to do to change this? And the whole point of this is not to just get people riled up, is not to make you feel afraid, but so that you can stay educated to how did we get this bad? And most importantly, how do we fix it? So thank you for tuning in, and don't forget every Fridays on Juno News. The city of Toronto is the largest city in Canada. It's an economic hub, and it has everybody from all over the world. You know, when I tell people, if you want to see the world, come visit Toronto, I mean it. Food, culture, religious-based institutions. You want to feel the world, you come to Toronto. And Toronto's been rattled and shaken because of the random acts of violence. Now, Toronto was recently shaken up because on June 17th, there was a random innocent person in his 30s walking in the city of Toronto, the downtown area, at 11 o'clock at night when he was approached by a random stranger, by all accounts and all information that we know, and he was stabbed after an altercation 20 times in his torso. Now, this poor victim was transported to a Toronto City area trauma hospital where he later succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Now, what's most important is this person who did this alleged first-degree murderer, was arrested a short time later. But it was the history of this person that really draw a lot of people, both in the law enforcement community, the city of Toronto, and victims groups to say, what happened here? How did this repeat violent offender be allowed out to commit another random act of violence and get charged with first-degree murder? So let's take this back. On December 21st in 2023, police officers in the Durham region, it's a bigger metropolis just east of Toronto, responded to an aggravated assault where witnesses saw this alleged person beating a 60-year-old man almost to death. Now, this 60-year-old man was transported to hospital and almost succumbed to their injuries, but luckily they survived. And the Durham Regional Police Service identified the suspect. Now, this suspect was identified as 22-year-old Anthony Oliveira. And police put out a bulletin and said, we're looking for Anthony after this, what appeared to be random act of violence on a 60-year-old that almost killed him. Now, a short time later, Anthony Oliveira, who's 22 years old, turned himself into Durham Regional Police Service. He was later charged and, most importantly, convicted of aggravated assault. Now, why does that conviction matter? Is because he goes from being an alleged person to being somebody who was convicted in a court of law. And what is the end result? What was the end result of beating a 60-year-old random person almost to death and being convicted? It looks to be that he was released on probation, which just means that he's serving his sentence back out in the community with a limited set of rules. So the conditions he'd have to abide by were probably not to consume alcohol, not to have any weapons, but also keep the peace and be of good behavior, which is a standard condition on a probation. And again, a probation isn't a bail. A probation is you've been convicted of a crime in a court of law. Now you get to serve your sentence out in public because the courts, for whatever reason, determine that, well, you know what, you're not a threat to society. But this happens after he gets convicted of almost beating a 60-year-old man to death. So let's flash forward just a short time later. Now, in May of 2025, while it's not a violent offense, he gets arrested for mischief. Now, mischief is a relatively minor offense. It could be interfering with somebody's property, it could be damaging some property, but he gets arrested for mischief. But keep in mind, at this time, he's already on probation for the aggravated assault. So December, convicted of aggravated assault. May of 2025, he gets charged for a mischief. And it looks like in between there, based on the information, that in both cases he gets convicted and he's on 2 probations. One for the aggravated assault, the second probation for a minor mischief, which he most likely pled guilty to because it was going to waste the court's time. And then we come to June 1st of 2025. He is in the Durham area and he approaches a random couple, and he brandishes a knife and he attempts to stab one of the people. Now, again, this couple at 10:30 p.m. at night looks to be just going for a walk when they get approached by this guy again, Anthony Oliveira. Pulls out a knife, tries to stab one of them. Luckily, nobody was injured, and he manages to flee before the police arrive. Now, the police ultimately get him. A short time later, he's now at this point really well known to Durham Regional Police Service, and they charge him with assault with a weapon, possession of a dangerous weapon, and 2 counts of breach of probation, likely being the probation from the aggravated assault and the second probation from the mischief just a short time later. And then we get to last week, June 17th, in the city of Toronto. Now, Anthony Oliveira is allegedly no longer operating and doing random acts of violence in Durham region, but he transitions over to the city of Toronto into a really populated area near Danforth and Coxwell Avenue. And while he's down there, he ends up, based on witnesses, getting in a confrontation with a victim who's in their 30s. And during this interaction, Anthony Oliveira allegedly pulls out a knife and stabs this innocent stranger victim to him over 20 times in his torso. Now, witnesses see this happening and say it's a violent exchange and say Anthony Oliveira flees. Now, they just say he's the suspect. They don't know him, but turns out it's Anthony Oliveira, allegedly. And this victim gets transported to a Toronto City hospital. And when he's in there, sadly, he succumbs to his injury and he becomes homicide number 16 for Toronto. The Toronto police does a great job. 2 days later, they publicly identify Anthony Stephen Oliveira, 24, of no fixed address, as the prime suspect in this first-degree murder. Now, why is first degree such a big deal? Why are there degrees of murder? Well, first degree is the highest degree of murder, and I'll tell you why. For first-degree murder to be charged, 2 things need to be proven, or there needs to be reasonable grounds that these 2 things exist. The first thing is actus rea, and the second thing is called mens rea. Actus rea is the actual guilty act. That means that Anthony Oliveira went out that day and he performed an act resulting in a murder. Now, the most important part of first-degree murder is the second part, the mens rea. The mens rea means Anthony went out that day with the intent to murder somebody. This wasn't him defending himself, and then in the process of defending himself, he stabbed the person 20 times and they died. That would be second-degree murder. In this case, it means that Anthony Oliveira allegedly stabbed this victim, unknown to him, a complete stranger, likely, who was targeted for being alone in an alleyway in Toronto, stabbed him 20 times with the intent and the mind that I wanted to kill this person. Now, Anthony, again, has no fixed address, and he was out on 2 probations. And this becomes a question that a normal Canadian will look at and say, you have somebody who's been convicted of an aggravated assault where he almost killed a 60-year-old. Then he got convicted again of likely a mischief, and he's on 2 probations. Then he goes out as a suspect, brandishes a knife on 2 random people, tries to stab one, luckily doesn't, gets charged for that, and now he's out and about in the community, and shortly after he does this, goes out and he murders a innocent 30-year-old walking in the city of Toronto that had, at this point, and to our knowledge, no connection to him. And that's where people start to lose their mind and say, what was this person doing out in the first place? Because all of us can recognize walking in our cities, our towns, in the city of Toronto or any metropolis with our significant other or our kids or our brother or our parents and just going for a walk after a late dinner or after a coffee just to get some fresh air. Now, to think that in Canada, now you're going to come across somebody who might have the mind of, I'm going to go out today and I'm going to murder a random stranger. That's no longer an unrealistic thought, sadly. That's a thought that we've seen replicated from the West Coast to the East Coast, all within this country. And that's where you get people that stand up and say, what is happening here? And they start to look to which direction. Well, who's responsible to fix this? Now, the police, they do a great job. After 2 days, they identify Oliveira. They put out a bulletin and they said, look, he's wanted for first degree murder. Now, I could tell you, as a former police officer, when we see those bulletins, when we come into work and it says, hey, we think this person who's wanted for first degree murder might be in our community, it's on high alert for us because there's a lot of pride, personally, of being the person who found this guy. So I could tell you it was on high alert for all officers to go and find this person. And a couple days later, he gets found. Now, on June 22nd, 2025, 5 days after the homicide happens, 3 days after he gets identified as the suspect, police officers in the Niagara Regional Police Service end up finding Anthony Oliveira of no fixed address in one of the busiest places in the country, in Clifton Hills in Niagara Falls. Now, keep in mind, Anthony has a history of attacking random people. He's attacked a 60-year-old, almost killed him, brandished a knife to a couple, and then now he's a prime suspect in a homicide where he stabbed an innocent person over 20 times. And by the way, he's of no fixed address. Now, for some people are probably wondering, how do we release somebody out on bail? How does a country say it's okay if you have no home to release you out on bail? Because one of the considerations is, well, how do we know if this person's ever going to show up to court, or how are they going to take off and flee? How are we going to find this person if they don't show up? Well, the way the system is designed in Canada, that it would be discriminatory to say based on somebody's residential status if they could be released or not. The idea behind that is, well, homeless people don't choose to be homeless, or at least that's the idea. So we can't punish them legally and inflict on their Charter of Rights and Freedoms for a fair, reasonable trial. So their status of living in a home or not doesn't impact it. But it's a serious concern if you look at the reality of things. I mean, how do we find these people? And Anthony Oliveira is clearly a transparent person that likes to go and transport from one city to another, doing crimes in Durham, doing crimes in Toronto, and then getting caught in Niagara Falls and Clifton Hills. And now when they find him, they arrest him and they bring him back in. And then the police service, Toronto Police Service, does a press release and says, we have a clear sign and story and history of this person, and we need to look at our release systems because in the police service's mind, without them saying it, but with them saying it is, this could have all been prevented if we had a common sense legal system that took into account public safety first and foremost. I mean, any normal person, if I were to go and tell a 10-year-old kid about this story, I'm almost certain that at some point that kid would step into play and be like, well, why was this person allowed out after the first time? Why was this person out after the second time? And now one of the questions that comes to mind is, after this first degree murder, will he get bail again? And at this point, we don't know. But I can tell you, everybody is innocent until proven guilty. And while the evidence is overwhelming, we have seen this week in many parts of the country through video evidence that we can see a criminal caught on video doing a crime, but it's not enough for a judge to say that's a conviction. In fact, it needs to be a little bit deeper than that. And that's where it becomes unreasonable. The burden of evidence required to prove that somebody done something has gotten so wide and so long, and it's always prioritized now, at least in the last 10 years, the violent offenders over the innocent victims in the communities in which they terrorize and live in. And that's where people start to say, what do we do about it? One of the things about Oliveira is over the last 18 months, he's had 3 violent incidents in which he's been arrested and charged for, and in some of them convicted of and released back out on probation into our communities. And it happens in one region, but he transitions over into 2 or 3 other regions, and he's selecting allegedly his victims at random. Could be anybody, could be me, could be you. Now, in one of those, one of the victims almost died. Luckily, he survived. And despite these multiple charges and breaches, Oliveira still remained at large even after the first degree murder charge was pending up until June 22nd, just a few days ago, in one of the busiest cities in the country, being Niagara Falls. And sadly, what's forgotten about is the in-betweens. It's the innocent victims caught up in the last 18 months that we publicly know about that are often forgotten. It's not about the 60-year-old man who almost dies. It's not about the husband and wife who almost get stabbed. And it's not about the victim, sadly, who was killed just because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time by a person allegedly with the intent to go out and murder somebody. And that's what's sad and lost is we will all look at Oliveira and we won't look at the victims, but those victims could be anybody. They could be me, they could be you. And that's why it's important for us as Canadians to recognize there is no us and them. We are all potentially on the lineup to be a victim. And that's why this has become a top priority for Canadians all over the country. It doesn't matter your background, doesn't matter your political interest. Every Canadian now values safety as a priority because it's something we're quickly seeing lost. And you cannot go a single day, whether it's on social media, your news, on the radio, or CP24, where you're not looking at something and seeing headers pop up all the time for violent crimes repeated by violent offenders that are consistently out on releases and bails. And it's at the point now where Canadians are saying, regardless of political stripe, this has to end. Now, sadly, as dangerous as Oliveira is, that's not the only thing that's coming into people's homes. We actually have literal home invasions. I could tell you in my community in beautiful Oakville, it's one of the best places in the country. I say that objectively and subjectively because I live here. Now, Oakville is highly sought after because of it's a great school system here, great community. It has affluent pockets as well. But Oakville has become a prime example in this country where if you do well in life, if you actually achieve a Canadian dream, and you want to come to a community where you can raise your kids, get involved in sports, have a great public education system, well, sadly, you're now a targeted person and a targeted community from not just auto thefts, not just drug traffickers, but one of the rising concerns for Oakville, Ontario has been violent home invasions repeatedly happening and zero recognition from the federal government to recognize that this is a problem not just happening in Oakville and not just happening in the greater Toronto area, but all throughout the country. Now, recently there was news of a victims of home invasion that actually fought back and were highly applauded because they managed to capture one of the people who tried to home invade them. And in this particular case, what struck me about this was a couple things. It wasn't just that this family fought back and actually found one of the perpetrators. It was that this family had gone through a home invasion just 3 weeks earlier. So on May 27th was their first break-in. Now, the intruders broke into this family's home through a bedroom window and they were armed with hammers. Now, think about that. You're sleeping in your house, a bedroom window where your kids could potentially be sleeping, you could be sleeping, gets broken by suspects with hammers. Now, this family managed to fight back. And what did they use? They used a coat rack at the time. And they managed to get these intruders who broke in again through a bedroom window with hammers coming into the home. They fled, but this family thought about this and they said, look, we have to be prepared for the next time. So what did they do? They prepared as a family. They stocked baseball bats and fire extinguishers in the house just in case, which is a whole thing legally, but let's not talk about that. That's for another time. In this particular case, what happens is this family gets victimized in probably one of the most invasive ways, and they decide as a family that we are going to create a plan, which I highly recommend. Look, there's something in policing that I think is very applicable to the normal world and to normal people. It's called the ABCs. You want to plan ahead, you want to be prepared, and you want to create escapes. And the whole idea is when something really bad happens to you, you don't want to be making your plan of action in that moment. You have to plan ahead. And then you need to be prepared. Well, in this particular case, this family said, well, we're going to put common sense into this place. And we are going to place items that might be weapons of opportunity to protect ourselves, not to hurt anybody, but to protect ourselves if this were to happen again. What might be somebody coming into the window again? Common sense, reasonable, totally rational to do. Well, sadly, May 27th, this first break and enter and home invasion happens while they're home sleeping. It happens again on June 19th in 2025. But this time it was different. It was around 4 o'clock in the morning when the family was awoken by loud bangs and shattering glass at the rear door of their house. The family rushes out of the house with their baseball bats. Again, they planned ahead, they were prepared, and they created a plan. And when they rush out with baseball bats, they discover 4 to 5 suspects dressed in all black, causing havoc inside of the house. Now, during the struggle, these guys don't have a hammer with them anymore. They have a firearm. During the struggle, a shot goes off into their home by one of the suspects. So I want you to imagine for yourself, you're this family. Just a couple of weeks ago, bad guys break into your house through the bedroom window with a hammer. And then 3 weeks later, what happens? You hear your back door smash. You go downstairs and there's a person with a gun ransacking your house as you're sleeping at 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, and by the way, your neighbors east, west, north of you have all gone through this over the last couple months, if not years, in the same area. And we've had multiple community meetings to say, what are we doing about this? I mean, we've spoken to every level of government. And the reality here is the government that's most responsible for the most impactful change is probably the federal government. And why do I say that? It's because these are repeat violent offenders that are continually let out on bail. And while we don't know the history of all of these suspects, what we do know is if I were to historically look back to all of the charges for people that were on home invasions, a lot of them, an abnormal majority of them, are already out on a bail or on a probation. And here's something interesting about home invasions. There is no criminal code charge of home invasion. It doesn't exist. It gets treated as a robbery or a break and enter or an assault with a weapon. And I'll tell you why. It's because home invasion was never a thing. Historically, when I first started policing on the streets of Toronto, a very, very rough area, home invasion would rarely happen. I could tell you in my almost 15-year career just in Toronto police, not including the 5 years in Peel Regional Police Service, but my 15-year career in Toronto police, I'd probably responded to 2 home invasions during that entire time. And keep in mind, I worked in some of the hardest hit areas. And it was so rare that when a home invasion happened, all of us recognized this is a big deal. Somebody coming into an innocent person's house or anybody's home, tying up them or their family and ransacking the place, oftentimes with weapons. Afterwards, when we identify these people, they would get charged with robbery, which is a act of theft with an act of violence, or a break and enter because they actually had broken into somebody's house, or they'd have a weapons charge. But there's no single charge of home invasion. And why that's important is because we don't have accurate statistics to how much that's grown. And it has grown significantly throughout the country. And here's my hypothesis to why it's grown. It's grown because during COVID, there was an abnormal growth of drug use. A lot of Canadians were stuck in their house, and it grew the drug market significantly. There was a lot of demand for drugs, and who supplies drugs? Organized crime groups give you the street level gang members distribute it out. People were locked in their house. And when you look about drug dealers and they're dealing a lot of drugs, well, there's a lot of money moving as well. And with that money moving, what happens with gang members is they have to then get weapons, which creates another demand, not just for drug use by people locked into their homes, going through mental health or personal issues, but now drug dealers have to defend their turf. There is no HR system for a drug dealer, so you have to get a gun. Well, that created a whole new different demand for the United States to export guns up to Toronto, which was our huge influx. Now, being a drug dealer in Toronto turned out to be such a dangerous profession because everybody was getting shot, because there was no repercussion, because in 2019, our bail systems got completely lax under the Liberal government. So drug dealers demand more guns. And then the guns come up here, and even drug dealers realize, listen, man, being a drug dealer might be a little too dangerous here because I don't want to get shot and killed for dealing drugs. And technology evolved. And we've all seen the videos. We've seen videos of guys early on and girls coming into your driveway, pulling your car door handle, and always somebody has a backpack. Well, that backpack would connect with a Bluetooth signal and they'd reprogram a key, and you'd wake up a couple hours later. And what happens to your car? It's gone. It's off of the driveway. And you'd be like, man, my car is gone. My GPS doesn't work. Well, they were making a lot of money. And the question becomes twofold. Number one is, well, how did this technology evolve so quick? And it was because that's what tech does. That's what the black market does. The black market drives innovation, not the government. It's always the black market or private sector. In this particular case, the innovation was let's transition from dangerous drug dealing to taking these cars and shipping them out through the ports. And that begs a whole other question. Well, who's asking for these cars? I want you to think early on. What were the types of cars being stolen? It was trucks, SUVs, and we had a couple of them that were taking out. In particular, you had, Ford F-150s, you had some Toyota Highlanders, and they were going out to these ports and shipped out overseas. Now, most Canadians think that as it gets shipped out overseas, it's some organized crime group and it's some auto body dealership in Africa that's selling Canadian cars with Ontario license plates. Yeah, that's a part of it. But I want you to think bigger. I want you to look at organizations like terrorist organizations and cartel groups and look at the vehicles that they're using all over the world. It's pickup trucks and SUVs. It just so happens that Canada and Ontario potentially became a source through auto theft innovation to supply organized crime groups internationally with vehicles for them to use in places where they could never get access to it. Now, the people doing these were dumb kids. And I'm going to say they're dumb kids because a lot of them are under the age of 18. I've arrested young people who've said, look, I have getting paid $5,000 to steal this car, drive it up to Montreal, and off it goes. I don't know where it goes. I don't know who's paying me. I just know I'm getting $5,000. And what happened is, as this is happening, you have these drug dealers working in this really dangerous environment that started to look at all these guys who utilize technology and innovation to start stealing all these cars and making $5,000 a pop on what the legal system considers nothing more than a property offense. And they said, well, I can make a lot more money by stealing cars and there's no repercussion for me. Actually, it's less than being a drug dealer. And that's where these home invasions grew. It's because the same violent offenders who were coming in and dealing drugs and shooting people and killing innocent people in some of our hardest hit communities, the drug dealers, transitioned over to auto theft, but the tech was too much for them. They didn't want to pay attention. It was too slow. And these Neanderthals ended up just saying, we're just going to kick in these front doors, hold up families at gunpoint, and steal every car. It doesn't matter what type of car it is. We're going to go after luxury cars. We're going to go after pickup trucks. Or we're going to go after SUVs because they know that they can get away with it. And they know there's a huge black market for it. locally and internationally. And the local proof is just Google search. Person buys a vehicle from a dealership, turns out it was revinned. That just means that this car was stolen, taken to some shady auto body shop with a dirty employee working in some sort of Ministry of Transportation, for example, which exists, and they revin a vehicle. Only later, through police investigation, do we find the vehicle and then we seize it. So the person who bought the car, sorry to tell you, you're out of luck. You're never getting your money back. And then we investigate the dealership. Now, that's a very complicated mess, but it's the truth. And that's where home invasions started to skyrocket. So we've had people living a normal life, going to see a movie, but they drive a high-end vehicle and they get surveilled, which just means they get followed by these gang members, organized crime groups, back to their house. And when they get followed back to their house, these groups will come back later at night, 4 a.m, do these violent home invasions at gunpoint and steal the car keys, hurt the family, and not even care. Why don't they care? Because they get on bail. There's no repercussion for it. And for all of us wondering, why aren't they doing something about it? It's because the legal system considers this a property crime. They say, well, they were coming in to steal your car. Yes, the robbery side is important. Yes, the weapons in your household, but ultimately it's just a car. And we've seen that viral clip of the Toronto police officer saying, leave your keys at the front door. Look, that went viral. I don't agree with that because I think it's submission to the bad guys, but I can understand the logic behind it. What he meant to say was, don't risk your family. These guys are coming. There's nothing we can do as police officers because the laws are not accurately representing what needs to get done to keep you and your family safe. We don't want to see you get hurt. If it's just a car, let it go. I know it sucks, but let it go because right now we're handicapped by the federal government and their legislation, specifically Bill C-75. No matter what police officers do in our communities, if we are catching these repeat violent offenders, if they're getting murderers, by the way, first-degree murderers, and they're getting out on releases, well, what else can they tell you? They're giving you practical advice to keep you and your family safe. Now, again, I don't agree with it, but I think I can understand the point he was trying to make. It was just poorly delivered, which happens all the time. So I'll give him a little grace. Now, this family that was the victim of this home invasion in Oakville, they reached out to me and we had a brief conversation and they explained to me what happened on the inside. And that's their story to tell. But what I can tell you is that they are not happy that this has happened to them in the last 3 weeks, 2 times, where not only were they a victim of a home invasion of somebody breaking into their bedroom with a hammer, but then 5 other guys had the audacity and confidence to come into their home, break in with a gun, brandish a firearm, and then shoot the gun as one of them was getting taken down. Now, here's a silver lining for this particular story here. The 5 guys, this family fights back. They use the baseball bats, they use a fire extinguisher. They fight back to protect themselves and protect their lives. And what happens is 4 of these cowards take off. They leave the house. But one of them, who gets all screwed up from the fire extinguisher, runs into the basement and now he gets stuck. He doesn't know the house. And that's the benefit. If a home invader breaks into your house, guess what? You know your house. They don't know it. So they used it to their advantage in this particular case, and they pinned this bad guy down. Now, the person who pinned him down is a family member who used to play rugby, doesn't mind getting his hands on somebody, gets his hands on the person, holds him down. The other 4 escape, but they capture this guy. And he gets arrested and charged with a boatload of offenses while the investigation is pending for the other 4. So whether it's a random person who's on multiple releases and convictions of killing innocent people, allegedly, or harming an innocent person, almost killing somebody, which he was convicted of, pulling out a knife, having no fixed address, these are all just single individual items to the court system. Now, what do I mean by that is the court system in Canada and the legal system in Canada doesn't look at you as a whole person. So when we go back to the first guy, Oliveira, who's had this huge history, each individual incident gets treated as its own. The entire history of this person has no weight or bearing on that individual incident. So when he goes out and he aggravates and he assaults and he almost kills a 60-year-old, and then he gets charged with the mischief, that 60-year-old incident, that aggravated assault at probation, has no bearing or weight on the new mischief charge because they're all allegations until he's proven guilty. Now, when he gets proven guilty, it has a little bit of weight. And I'll tell you where the weight is. That weight only comes in if he gets found guilty again. So if he gets convicted again, then that guilty plea or that guilty verdict gets taken in conjunction with the previous conviction, and then it impacts his sentencing, which just means that your previous convictions, not your allegations, the previous convictions have some weight in your sentencing. But where do we see any of that playing out in any part of it? Now, the world has changed. Canada has changed. The frustration that most of us have, not just you at home, not just normal citizens. And look, I've been resigned from the profession for 2 years to have more of a larger public voice, to do things like this on Juno News, just to educate Canadians as well as advocate for them. I can't tell you the number of messages I get from people from all over the country saying, thank you for speaking about what we're feeling, because it's important. Education is the key. But with this guy here, what a lot of people are kind of stuck on is to say, well, why doesn't our legal system adjust to the current time? And that becomes the most important question, is at what point are we going to innovate and bring our legal system to represent what's actually happening on the ground level? Because there should be some conversations to say, well, how much of the history are we going to take into consideration when we decide if we're going to release this person or not? Because guess what? It has value. And under Bill C-75 under the Liberal government, it still has some value, but it's not prioritized. What's prioritized in Bill C-75, the bail catch and release system, is to put the offender first. The actual wording in the legislation says that we need to be able to put conditions on this bad guy or accused that are as least onerous as possible on him or her, meaning that if you get accused of committing a crime, like trying to stab two people, when you get put on catch and release bail system bill under Bill C-75, that law enforcement has to make sure that the conditions we put on are fair to you, that it doesn't ruin your life, regardless of the evidence in the case. And that's where this whole thing blew up and went out of whack. And that's where Canadians are saying, you adjusted our legislation to represent the times in 2019 that were probably driven by ideology as opposed to fact, and really looking at the threat assessment for what the country has now become. Now you also have a responsibility and obligation to deal with the mess by being proactive and represent progressively what's actually happening. So are there things that need to get done? Absolutely. If I were to make some recommendations, which everybody knows, it's first, we need to revisit and repeal Bill C-75. That's the lowest hanging fruit. You want to talk about saving lives, stopping crime, putting repeat violent offenders back into custody while they wait their trial to keep the rest of us safe. The lowest hanging fruit, the easiest solution is repeal Bill C-75 and go back to the previous bail system, which kept these type of people in custody because the courts were compelled to. Second of that is we need to bring in some new charges to represent the current landscape of what's happening in the country, because it should represent that the government is in tune with what's happening and what's important for many constituents all over the country. Those offenses are probably home invasion and carjacking. We don't have two specific criminal code offenses for them. But why it's important to have that in there is because we need to showcase to repeat violent offenders and all criminals that these crimes are so invasive and so serious that we're now creating new criminal charges to accurately represent them. They're no longer going to be broken down to a break and enter and a robbery and a weapons charge, an assault charge, and a theft charge. Nope. It's a single charge that should be what's called indictable or not hybrid. And all that means is that there's two levels of offenses in Canadian criminal code. One level is called a summary offense. It's the lower end. It's like some kid who steals a chocolate bar from Shoppers Drug Mart. That's called a summary offense. And then you have an indictable offense, which is murder. That's very serious. And the differences between the two are sentencing. How long will somebody get in jail? And how serious does the legal system take it? Then you have hybrid offenses, which is offenses that have both arms, a summary offense and an indictable offense. Frauds, for example, $5,000 is the marker. If it's under 5,000, it's a summary. If it's over 5,000, it's an indictable. But I think it's time now in Canada that we have two straight indictable, serious offenses for home invasions and carjackings. And why? Common sense. Home invasion, somebody breaches that threshold coming into your household. The government needs to show through legislation that this is not okay. We're going to take this serious. And how we're going to take it serious? We have this straight indictable criminal code offense. It also gives some people some peace of mind that, hey, what I felt as a victim, it's understood and it's been heard. Now, additionally to that, we need the same type of value and impact for carjackings, because I can tell you the same people doing these violent home invasions are the same people that are holding regular people up in the middle of the day at gunpoint and stealing their cars. It's the same people. And why it's important to have the carjacking offense is because we need to call it for what it is. Carjacking gets treated the exact same way as home invasions. There is no carjacking. It's a theft of an automobile. It's a robbery because violence was used. It was a theft of property over 5,000 because most cars are nowadays, especially these ones that are being targeted. The other part of that, the invasive part, is when you're occupying your motor vehicle or you're driving your car and you have your kids, and in my case, I have my wife and my kids in my car, that car to me is a home. That's a place of safety. That's why I have locks on my car door. At no point should I feel like I am eligible to be carjacked, and this is not going to be treated as serious as if it wasn't my own home. We need to represent that. So we do need to do those three things: repeal Bill C-75, bring in a home invasion charge, and bring in a carjacking charge to accurately represent what's happening, and start sharing more stories among our neighbors to what we need to do to be able to protect ourselves. And protecting ourselves is a whole other topic, which I'm sure we'll dive into, especially after, in the region of Vaughan, a homeowner who is having his car stolen by four masked men utilized a firearm to do shooting to scare him off, and he ended up getting charged, which is a whole other story. Now, Canada, sadly, the crime is going to continue, and we're going to be doing this every Fridays on Juno News. My name is Ron Chhinzer. Looking forward to seeing you next Friday, and happy Canada Day.